wanted the best? You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. I should make a challenge there every day to hit a different pitch and just see what happens. I don't know. Clearly, my wanting to end up in opera is not going to work out. We all know that after 13 years, right? Welcome to the show, my friends. We certainly appreciate you being part of the big show. Thanks for all the calls and emails we've been getting lately. It's been quite exciting, especially the calls. We're actually going to put a number out. I'm going to make a number for the show people can call into, because people have been tracking my number down lately and calling in, and I'm just like, well, that's pretty cool. But it's on my personal line, damn it, which I don't mind so much, but we'll make a business line for it. So stay tuned for that. There'll be some giveaways we'll be giving away too that we've got coming up. So we'll watch for that as well. Refer the show to your family, friends, and relatives. Remember, it's the holiday season. One thing we should make an announcement with, we're doing our big CEO interviews at CES show that we've been doing for 13 years or so. And those are coming up. So stay tuned for that. There'll be a bunch of products we'll be reviewing, of course, as we always do from CES show. And it's going to be exciting. That's going to be the first week of January. So you'll see a flood of our interviews there where we sit down with CEOs of major corporations and talk to them about what the hell is this? No, I'm just kidding. You know, basically whatever the phone is or whatever the thing is. Anyway, youtube.com/Chris Voss, goodreads.com/Chris Voss, the big LinkedIn groups, the LinkedIn newsletter, all the stuff we do on LinkedIn. And we're trying to get stuff working over there on the, the TikTok, but we just can't be cool. So we're trying to get our mojo on, or whatever that means. Anyway, we have an amazing author on the show. He's the architecture critic of the New York Times. You may have heard of it. It's been around for a couple hundred years. I think at least 100 or 200 years. I'm just making stuff up as I go along, people. He's on the show with us today. He's going to be talking about his newest book that comes out. It's yesterday, November 29th, 2022. I can't believe it's almost Christmas. The Intimate City, Walking New York. Michael Kimmelman is on the show with us today. As I mentioned, he's the architecture critic. He can be architectural if he wants. I mean, it's a free country. Of the New York Times. He was the paper's chief art critic, and from Berlin created the Abroad column covering politics and culture across Europe and the Middle East. He has reported from more than 40 countries and founded Headway, a nonprofit journalistic initiative focused on global challenges and paths to progress. A native New Yorker, twice a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Congratulations. Kimmelman is the author of The Accidental Masterpiece on the Art of Life and Vice Versa, and Portraits, talking with artists at the Met, the Modern, the Louvre, and elsewhere. I'm not sure where elsewhere is that. Is that a place, or is that just everywhere? Welcome to the show, Michael. How are you?
Fine, Chris. Thanks. Happy to be here.
Congratulations on the new book. We're glad to have you. Give us your .coms wherever you want people to find you on the interwebs and get to know you better.
Yeah, well, I'm at Kimmelman on Twitter, so long as Twitter's still around. And I don't have my own website, but I'm reachable through the New York Times. And you can click on my byline, and you can get to me directly. It's not exactly like your direct phone, but it's pretty close.
There you go. The New York Times, I've heard of that. It's been around. Yeah. We've had a number of reporters and journalists from the reporters, journalists, whatever. Both.
Whatever.
Yeah, from the New York Times. Great publication. Wonderful journalists who great, amazing books we have out on the show. So you've been writing for some time. What motivated you to want to write this book?
Well, Chris, it actually grew in the very first days of COVID. It grew out of a kind of despair and desperation. So the New York had actually just gone into lockdown. I mean, I think Governor Cuomo had basically told people everybody had to stay in, and so, you know, like everybody else, I felt panicked and confused and so forth. But I also knew that I wouldn't be able to do my job in a normal way. And I wanted to sort of think of what I could do, partly to get my own mind off the, pandemic. It was about to become a pandemic, but also to see what I could do with which was useful. So I sent out an email to a whole bunch of people I knew, architects and designers and writers and others, and I suggested that we take a walk around the city. I said, someplace meaningful to you. We could just take a short walk. That was still possible. And I thought, back then there was a lot of pressure on people like me and journalists and people in the media, and everyone was supposed to predict what was supposed to happen. And, I didn't know what was going to happen, in an hour. And I was completely paralyzed and unable to predict anything. And also knew that we were doing a lot of leaning on into disaster scenarios, like there was a lot of prognosticating about the end of days.
Yeah.
Especially if you were, as I was, living in New York City, the news was just, everyone was abandoning New York City. And, it was just like one of these disaster movies of the 1970s, with people fleeing and the city was going to end and what were we going to do and so forth. I just, A, I had no idea, but B, I didn't think that was true. I mean, the city has been through lots of ups and downs. A century ago, we went through another epidemic and came out of that much stronger. So what I did know was that the city itself was a kind of rock. It was something we all shared. It was something we could see outside our windows. It was something that gave us a sense of community when we were suddenly locked inside. So I thought walking around would be kind of a distraction and a joy, and it would give me something to do besides worry about my family.
Yeah.
And, so that's how it started, and then it just grew over time. Because I think people were glad to get something that wasn't just another, gloom and doom story about the pandemic. But then also, I think it was something that bound us together, because that's what cities at their best do.
You speak to that well, because we went through something where, something that we took for granted every day, was taken kind of from us a little bit. And we, I had always gone out, like you, to eat with friends and coffee, and, you go out and do stuff. You don't really think about it. Like, you're not like, well, what if I didn't have Starbucks today? Which you probably should think about. Get some real coffee, people. But you suddenly couldn't go out to eat with people, and you lost your society, your community, and you're just like, well, you got to go spend time, with the wife and kids. And have you seen my kids? No, I'm just kidding. I don't have any kids. That's the way that joke works. But I've seen other people's kids, and they should really. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Being funny. Just offend everyone's kids, Chris, on the show. That'll make for great audience pleasure. We lost everybody who doesn't have kids, Chris. 3 people are listening to the podcast. Anyway, before I segue again, and so it was like it was really hard, and you realize how important those things were. And I mean, the dire situation that was coming out of New York, and of course big cities, where people like, we're out of here, we're moving. You saw these moving trucks that were leaving big cities, and people were doing the death knell of like, there'll never be big cities anymore, and everyone's moving to the middle of the country. And then of course everyone moved to Kansas and went, holy shit, we're moving back to New York City. All right, I just lost the Kansas crowd, all 5 of them. So you really speak to that, and it was hard to come back to that. One of the most interesting things was seeing Times Square like a ghost town, like just empty. Yeah. What was that like for you to see that?
Yeah, I mean, the very first walk I did in the book was with a guy named David Rockwell, who's done a million. He's an architect and a designer. He's done a lot of shows on Broadway, won Tonys and stuff like this. And we met in Times Square and walked around, and there was like nobody there. I mean, the New York Times is called Times Square for a reason. So it's where my office is, and I was used to being there, every day and seeing mobs. And now there was nobody. There was a couple of people in Elmo and Mickey Mouse costumes, hoping to find some easy marks, but there were no tourists. it was nothing. On the other hand, and that was very eerie, but it was also a kind of wonderful moment in retrospect to sort of see. It was like time stopped, and it was to see the buildings, to see the streets, to sort of breathe and look around. One of the things about the way we move and operate in cities is often that we're just, not really taking that moment to look, and we're trying to get quickly from one place to another. So on a certain level, I think the pandemic also had the value of letting us stop and look around, reminding us how we wanted each other in those streets as well.
Except for my kids.
Kids.
Yeah. Have you seen them lately? That's going to be the callback joke of the show, I guess. You're right. It was eerie. Like I would see pictures in New York and I'd just be like, holy crap. And it would, look like, what was that Legend movie with that one actor who punched the other actor, Will Smith? It's kind of like apocalyptic sort of stuff that was eerie. So you guys, let me ask you this, because I wanted to ask you this first. Why did you name the book The Intimate City? Is this a love letter to New York, basically?
It really did end up being one because, first of all, I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up here. I've lived elsewhere. I lived in Europe. I came back, and I love other places. I'm not. I know what some people think of New York. It's not for everybody, but I think it's an equal opportunity elitist city, meaning anybody can come here and the next morning just say they're a New Yorker, and that's totally fine by me. I think it's a very welcoming place, in fact, or whatever its reputation might be. So I love the city, and it began with a desire that that people also share in that affection for this thing which was binding us together. But I also took people around and asked them to take me to places that were, meaningful to them. So a lot of what I got was not, it's not like an architecture tour or just a guidebook, which there's great guidebooks out there. It was really a way in which people talked about themselves and their lives and what was meaningful to them. And in some cases about their childhoods and the neighborhoods where they grew up. And, because cities are lived places, they're not accumulations of buildings or landmarks. And everybody has a different experience. When I moved through Greenwich Village, where I grew up, I have a million feelings. I'm not checking off the box of the name of an architect who did a building on a particular street. And that's a good case where I was walking around with somebody, and he was just pointing out how the neighborhood had changed, and a street that I had basically grown up on, I'd never really looked at. I never stopped in that way to think about how the street and the city in general got to take the forms that it did. Why one side of the street looked different from another. So it was intimate in a lot of ways. It was intimate for me. It was intimate, I think, for the people who I walked around with. And I do also believe that it's New York has this reputation too of being such a big city that it's kind of anonymous. But in fact, it's made up of millions of people who are neighbors and know each other and have their streets and communities where there's very tightly bound together. And there's a lot of intimacy in the city in the best sense of the word.
Yeah, people are connected to their community. And I think that's what we found during COVID. We were alienated from our community, or, we couldn't enjoy our community. And that's when we realized how important it was. I realized a lot of things. I think everyone sat down and said, what are my values in life? What's important? What's not important? What's meaningful? What's not meaningful? My family can disappear in a heartbeat, and this virus can take them, and I don't know, it can just happen like that. And you don't know. It was like so random. It's a beautiful book because not only do you have a lot of interesting pictures that you don't normally see in the mainstream, like here's the Eiffel Tower, or not the Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty. Here's the here's all the things everyone wants to see. And you really go around and throughout it, you're having these conversations with people that go on these tours with you. And it really kind of adds to the intimacy of it.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Photography is beautiful. I had some amazing photographers who did that work. And I since I didn't do this myself, I can just say the people at Penguin Press who produced the book produced this incredibly beautiful object. It's a beautiful thing, and heavy.
Yeah, it's a heavy book. It's a
It
good
has a
heavy
real
book.
weight to it. But the tone of it, I think, is very light and upbeat and accessible and human, which was the goal. I wanted people to, it's not a book about COVID, but you're right that it grows out of that sense that there is this thing that we share each other in this place, in these different communities, and so there's a sense in which I think the preciousness of the book, in a way, is a little like the preciousness that we felt about this, about our lives together that seemed so vulnerable at that time.
Yeah, you're like, are we ever going to be able to go out and eat again? Like, are we all just going to be locked in our homes? It's going to be,
well, Chris, one of the interesting things that happened early on in New York, and I think it happened in a bunch of other cities too, but here it was on a big scale, of course, was that the hospitality industry sort of collapsed. I mean, nobody was going out to restaurants, and that's a big part of the New York City economy. And so overnight, the decision was made to allow restaurants to take over essentially parking spots and sidewalks, and to have places to eat outside. They came to be called streeteries, like these little stalls and stands and covered stands outside, and thousands of them around the city suddenly sprang up overnight. And there were a bunch of interesting things that happened as a result of that. One was that, in New York, if you try to like eliminate a single parking space, it's like the Battle of the Somme in terms of community resistance. People are like up in arms, and you can't take my parking space, and it's just crazy. So that doesn't usually happen. Overnight, like 10,000 of them, which was partly because there was a larger need, and partly because we just exercised the will to do it. It was like, okay, well, we're just going to say we'll do it. We didn't have to go through that process. But of course, the other thing that happened was that suddenly all these streets all over the city became activated again. People could go out, sit outside where it was safer, they felt. We felt, and streets came back to life. And we can take for granted, and I think especially people who don't live in a city may take for granted just how meaningful are these shared public spaces, how important they are. You don't have to live in a tiny apartment to need to have those spaces. It's just, there's something about the very nature of a city, a democracy, a cosmopolis, that is based on these spaces, these places where we negotiate each other, figure stuff out, figure our shared existence together. I mean, I don't mean to make it too highfalutin, but that's sort of the beauty of a city. And when these streeteries opened, you saw people just like, it was like a collective breath of fresh air, just like everyone exhaled, and the streets came alive again. And this was still before, we had vaccines, before people felt even entirely comfortable, well, if anybody does now, going out and being together, because the urge to do that, the need to do that was so strong. And the last thing, if I'll just say, Chris, it also tells us something very important, if I may just pontificate for another second, which is that, a city like New York can seem to be this monolithic, gigantic thing built of stone and steel and glass, but it's actually an organism. It changes, neighborhoods change, the buildings change. You come from Vegas where things are changing all the time. The cities that's part of what makes them alive. They're dynamic. And so we saw that overnight the streets could change. And I think that was also an important lesson, because we were stuck in this pandemic, and it was a reminder that things can and that they will change. And indeed they have.
I love it. We really found out how important community was. Like we really took it for granted. And like you say, New York is such a hustle and bustle, big city. I've been there. You got to keep moving. You can't just stand on the sidewalk and block everybody, or you're going to get punched or yelled at. It's a busy city. And you took time with this book and had the opportunity there with COVID to spend time in places where the bustle is gone, and you can look around and go, what is this about, and what is it? I grew up in SoCal, so I
Mm.
kind of lived in the big city, and then in my teens, my parents moved us to American Fork, Utah, which was basically like Kevin Bacon in that one movie, going from, I think we moved from New Jersey to American Fork, Utah. It was the same city, and it was shock. It was just shock and awe. And I remember growing up in my teens and reaching that point of wanting to go to what was, the big city, Salt Lake City, for the time for us, which is, nothing compared to New York. But still the vibrancy of going there. And this is back in the age when cruising was what you did as teenagers. I don't know if you remember
Yeah,
that.
of course.
But you cruise to go meet girls in your teens, and you drive up and down State Street and just do that over and over all night long. Like, it seems kind of silly now, but it actually was probably better than dating on dating apps. But there was a vibrancy. You go to the city and there was a aliveness there. There was a feeling of energy. The big buildings, just implied that there was something going on. One of my favorite lyrics and songs about Manhattan in New York was written by Rush, Neil Peart, The Camera Eye. I don't know if you've ever read the lyrics from that or been a fan, but he wrote some beautiful lyrics about just the excitement of the city, the feel of Manhattan, the feel of being in those places and finding those. So I love the stories you tell in the book as you go through them. How did you choose? Like, there's a lot of stuff that I never seen in New York, and I've been there a lot, but you don't see it on the normal. Here's the Statue of Liberty. Here's the the big towers. How did you pick things? Did you pick things, or did you just kind of wander?
Well, it grew. It was sort of organic over time as I realized that people were liking this, and as I felt that there was because I should say I began by doing it in the New York Times. I was publishing these in the Times, and so I was getting reactions from people, and I began to where many of these, not all of the things in the book appeared, and I began to think, well, actually, what I can do here is create a portrait of New York. By covering not a complete portrait, obviously nothing vaguely like it, but something that suggests the complexity of the city, the variety of neighborhoods and people who've made it, the fact that it's not just a bunch of architects who design buildings, but you have engineers who design those buildings, lawyers and politicians and others who establish the laws and terms of by which things can happen in a city, community organizers, the list goes on and on and on. And that if the book could somehow be a little tiny reflection of that, it would stand in for the city at large. So I was trying to make sure that I covered ground, but also not the ground that you're describing. I do Times Square and, some other obvious places, like I said, Broadway, and Museum Mile, but it's really to give you a sense of just how rich and unending the city is. Like you were saying, Chris, you can't stand on a street corner without getting bumped or punched for too long. But the truth is, the city, and this is a lesson to me, I have to say, even as someone who's lived here for most of my life, the city is full of places which are, some of them look like the country. Some of them are very suburban. Some of them are, sprawling neighborhoods of single family houses. Some of them are some weird mix. The tall buildings, and like I was in Forest Hills, Queens. Forest Hills, Queens was a planned community a century ago when Queens was still farmland, a little over a century ago, which was built to attract essentially people from Manhattan who wanted to move to the suburbs, but still on these newfangled subway lines. And it's basically, the countryside with houses in it. It's like an English village. And right next door, right across the street, are these big, tall buildings where lots of new immigrants have moved in. Again, a really wonderfully complex, hard to describe thing. It's not a single thing. And you get out at a subway station in Forest Hills, having come from, let's say, Times Square, it's like you've gone to another world entirely. You've gone into the English countryside. So, I mean, I think I wanted to give some sense of that. And I also wanted to talk to a guy named Eric Sanderson, who's just great. Eric is a scientist, an ecologist, and has studied the evolving geography and topography and ecology of the city. So he and I looked back. We pretended that we were in the city back when Henry Hudson first sailed into the harbor in 1609. What would we see? And that conversation took us back like 450 million years. And we did the same thing in the Bronx. It was really cool. Like, I had no idea, that Times Square had been a beaver pond, or, that Lower Manhattan had been covered with like half a mile of ice, that kind of thing. It was really fascinating. As I said, one learns, I learned, how things got to be the way they are.
We study history. We have a lot of historians that come on with their books, and we talk about textually history and tell the stories of them. But I never really thought about it from the angle that architecture tells a story of our history and our city, and it has stories that are built into it. Somebody put their heart, soul, and mind into something, their passion. Maybe it tells a story of their family, their family history, a story of the city in and of itself. And so really these things are not only visually appealing, to us. You look at text in a history book, and I certainly did in high school, and I was like, oh God, I got to read stuff. But with architecture, you can look at it and you can go, that's really interesting. Yeah. Like, one of my favorite things in LA was to go down to some of the old, I don't know if is it called Art Deco? Some of the Art Deco of LA that, that kind of, that wonderful feel that you get from, the old Hollywood sort of.
Downtown LA is full of that.
Yeah.
City Hall, and
I love it. I see it and I just like, this is so awesome. I wonder where it came from.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful that you do this. Anything we haven't touched on in the book that we should touch on? You do cover 4 of the 5 barrios in the book. You make chapters on each different areas and stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, we would cover, so New York is made up of 5 boroughs, and I couldn't get Staten Island, so next time. But I try to cover a lot of ground, and my hope is that people will read the book who live in New York, who want to come to New York, who just think about New York, who think about cities, and will read it entirely for pleasure. I think it's not meant to be a textbook. It's meant to be deeply personal, because, as you say, Chris, buildings are lived in, communities are lived in, and I think that sense of life and how we express ourselves in the communities we create, the places we build, that's sort of what New York, like other great cities, is all about. So I hope people get that from the book, and I hope they find it beautiful, because I certainly am so grateful that it's such a nice looking object too.
I liked it because I could go through it and I didn't feel like I had to read from beginning to end.
Right.
I was kind of found myself fishing through the pictures.
Yeah.
And and there's pictures on, I think, almost every page, or every couple pages, about every other page or so. And so I found myself kind of just flipping through, and then I'd see like, hey, what is that? That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then I get to reading the conversations that you had around the pieces. And so I really liked it because it didn't feel like it was a book that was forcing me to like, you must start on page 1, or you want to know what's going on. And you could just like jump around, you can hop around, and you can just fiddle with it when you want, pick it up when you want.
Absolutely.
And so that made it really good.
A pleasure. Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it made it for a fun read.
Yeah, and it's also, I will say, since you're allowing me to do this, it was also intended, when I did the walks, that somebody could take these walks. So you can go with the book or with the audio version of Kindle, whatever, and you can go around to these places and see them yourself. They were designed as walks.
Yeah.
So, I do hope it'll inspire people who come here. When we walk around a place, I think we come to feel that we, on some level, own it, that we have come to, it becomes ours. Why do we get on an airplane, save money, deal with TSA and all the hassle of an airplane, and fly someplace and deal with jet lag maybe, and then walk around? It's because on some level, it's not just a bucket list thing. It's because then we believe that on some level it becomes a part of us too. It's ours, and I think that's what I hope the book conveys, and it's sort of what I meant about New York too. It's a place for everyone. I really do believe that. It doesn't mean that everyone has to love it, but I do believe it's open. It's an open city, and that's a really, to me, a very joyous thing about it.
Definitely. And then if you go to probably many of the sites that are in here, you'll avoid the tourist crowds.
You will indeed.
That's what anytime I go to downtown Las Vegas, I'm like, effing tourists. Oh my gosh. They're walking around going, oh, lights. I've never seen lights before. And you're like, get out of my way. It's a casino, man. It's been here forever. Get over it. But no, that's the beautiful part about New York. Was there a favorite barrio or area you had that you loved the most architecture wise?
I mean,
am I putting you on the spot?
No, you're not putting me on the spot exactly, but I can't say there's one. Look, I did a walk around my old neighborhood, and I do love the Village. It's it's sort of in my bones. The other night I woke up dreaming that I was in my childhood bedroom. Probably everybody does this, but that included the traffic noise outside the window. Wow. So it's sort of something I still have family in that neighborhood. I live uptown now, but that was fun to go do that because again, I was able to see things I didn't know. I'd never thought about because I'd just taken it for granted. There's a street called Christopher Street. Why is Christopher Street at a weird angle when all the other streets are at a grid in the city? Well, that's because it was the property line of a British admiral who had his estate there in the colonial era. And this was the border of his property. And all these other crooked streets in that area were where there were other property lines and cow paths and stuff. So these are like, little embedded memories. That's not maybe the best example, but it's just one little thing that was like opened my eyes to something I even thought I knew.
We back in the early days of Instagram, when it was kind of more about photos and not about thirst traps, some of my famous photographer friends would do these photo tours where you go to a city or go to an area and you just walk around as a team of people and photograph stuff. And some people would be there that knew the history and talk about the history. We should bring those back. Yeah. Only from an architecture aspect where we can have someone like you who can talk about how, this is built in 18 whatever, and it has, this sort of style and why they maybe did it that way. That would be really interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always interesting to have yes, I obviously agree that architectural stuff can be super interesting. People need to know, I think also why that matters. Like what difference does it make? And there's so many different ways of seeing the same thing. Chris, I don't know where your fictional children are now, but it's a funny thing about kids, because when if you have kids, parents know that you take them to a place and you want to show them something. This is a famous building that was designed so, and they're like watching a balloon go up in the air or noticing a bottle cap on the street, or they're in the same place, they're occupying the same space, but having a completely different experience about what matters. And I think, that's not wrong. That there are a lot of different ways we can unpack the places we move through and live in and what they mean to us. If we just take the time, and that's sort of, as I said, what this project allowed me to do and a few other people, thanks to COVID. COVID was also a lesson. It is a lesson, I suppose, but crises can be opportunities. They're not only disasters. And for me, it was an opportunity to look around and see things a little more slowly, which is, you always get stuff you just didn't get before if you stop and look.
Yeah. I think the reason I appreciate this is I was a photographer for a lot of years. And one of my favorite things was to go jaunting for a day, do day jaunts where I go someplace and shoot. And in Southern California, I was living at the time. There's so many different places to go shoot. And my favorite place to go shoot of all times was Venice Beach. And I could go there and you could sit along the boardwalk and I'd have a long 200 lens. So what I do is I'd sit there, get a table, and lean out with the 200 lens, and you'd shoot down because people know you're shooting them. Then And so you'd shoot way down, and Venice Beach is like, it's like the freak show of personalities and
Incredible.
people. And it's interesting to watch, people do it. And I would sit there for hours shooting people. Sometimes you pay people to get some shots of them because they were really interesting. Like the guy who roller skates around with the guitar that's been in a lot of movies you may have seen.
Right.
But there's a real appreciation just sometimes sitting down and just looking around you.
Yeah.
And going, what the hell is, why the hell, the who, what, where, when, and why,
Yeah.
Why is this here?
Yeah.
Who put this here? Why?
I mean, the thing about, I love LA. I love all parts of LA, including Venice. But the one thing about New York is it is a walkable city, and with the subway, I mean, you do have the metro in LA, which is now expanding people's ability to do that sort of thing. But really, the thing about New York is you can go down into the subway, you can get out. New Yorkers should do this more. You can get out of a place you've never been before, and like you're in a different world. And I do know a lot of people who do what you're describing, sort of go around with a camera. I have a good friend, Daniel Arnold, who's an amazing photographer. And that's he does sort of what you're describing. He's just like out there all day looking for these kind of unexpected views, unexpected people. It's something the city like offers up to you because there's just so much happening, so many people passing by, so many different views, so many different places for you to, look out over the water or look down a long street. And I find it inspiring. And I think Daniel is like a good example of a photographer like you describing, just the sort of wonder of being in a place where unexpected stuff is always happening.
You catch funny moments too. Just like funny bits and moments and different things. And I've even caught things where the reflection of someone's sunglasses reflected something that was really cool and blowing that in. So I think that's what's beautiful about your book. It reminds us to be in the present and to appreciate things, because I mean, I get out and play now because I'm like, if they have another COVID or pandemic, I'm getting my time in now, man. I'm appreciating life and everything else. So this has been really interesting. It would be kind of interesting. Sadly, it would bring us back to electronic items that keep us from looking at the beauty around us. Yeah. That's probably a whole nother podcast chat. But, it would be cool if they put like a QR code or something on buildings, at least really cool old buildings with great architecture. And you could like go up and it would speak to you and be like, this building was built in, that would be really cool.
I think that's actually a great idea, Chris.
Yeah.
There you go. Museums do that. If you go into museums now, you just listen to your head.
Hey, listen to your headphones. But to be able to walk around a city and have little walkarounds, and maybe that should be like people could sell those as a tour. I mean, we used to do that with the photographic thing. You'd pay like $10.
Yeah.
And the head photographer take you around. Anyway, Michael, it's been wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you for coming by. Really appreciate it.
So much for having me, Chris. It's super fun.
Brilliant discussion. Be present, love the life, love and live the life that you have, because time is short, my friends. Any .coms or Twitter, wherever you want people to look you up on the interwebs there?
As I said, you're happy to reach out to me at the Times or on Twitter or on Instagram. But I'm just hoping you guys will go ahead and find the book somewhere and buy it and enjoy it. It's easily found in every bookstore, I hope, and online. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Grateful. And thanks so much for tuning in. Order the book wherever fine books are sold. Stay away those alleyway bookstores. I had to get a tetanus shot after going in one. The Intimate City, Walking New York by Michael Kimmelman. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in the show. We certainly appreciate it. YouTube.com/Chris Voss, Goodreads.com/Chris Voss, all the LinkedIn groups and all that crap we do on the interwebs. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time.